Sunflower Nation. Thank you so much for joining me today for another episode of Women in Leadership. I am Dr. Edith Banks, and I am very excited today to have with me Dr. Lola Brown. Dr. Lola, can you please tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, first, let me just say thank you, Dr. Banks, for giving me the space and the platform. I am completely honored to be a part of this podcast today and look forward to a great conversation. My role is Associate Dean for Research at Weill Cornell Medicine, which is the medical school of Cornell University. I've been in that role for about 5.5 years. And in that capacity, I work very closely with our leadership in the medical school to try to create spaces for our faculty to enhance and bolster their research programs. So how I got to my role, it was a long road, but really a great road. I started off loving science and have a PhD in biochemistry. I started off from New Jersey, from Teaneck, New Jersey, and wanted to do science from a young age, and started with my bachelor's degree in biology from Brown, and then went on to do a master's degree in biomedical engineering from Georgia Tech and Emory. And then after a little break working at Emory and Spelman, I then decided to go back to school and get my PhD, which I mentioned is in biochemistry from the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. Then I finished up my training at Yale University, where I was doing a postdoc in biomedical engineering again. And so when I was sort of in my postdoc, I was thinking about what I wanted to do as a career. I knew I loved teaching, and so being a faculty member was a top thing, but I also was looking at different career paths. And so felt I had some skills and some ability to do leadership and management, and had a fantastic mentor that said, hey, I have an opening at the City College of New York. Come work with me. And I did. It was one of the best decisions I've made. I worked with her at the City College of New York as her assistant dean, and loved academic administration. It was my first time doing it. And I was there for a few years and then transitioned to Weill Cornell.
That's amazing. That's quite a journey. First of all, you went to some very impressive schools. Tell us a little bit about more about your academic journey. For high school, did you go to private school?
So I am public high school K through 12. Very proud of that fact. I believe in public schools. I think that they are tremendously important, and am a product of the public school system, like I said, in Teaneck. And it was in high school that I really sort of identified that life science, biology in particular, was going to be my area of passion. And there's a lot I can say about it. I'll give you the shorter version, and we can kind of jump into it. But I was in my AP biology class. I was a junior in high school. I was in my AP bio class, and the teacher for that day was speaking about sickle cell anemia. And I was completely just enamored with what she was saying. I couldn't listen more intently. As you may know, sickle cell anemia is a blood disorder that affects the hemoglobin, and it's a point mutation, so it's one nucleotide mutation. And so in most cases, a single mutation doesn't have these deleterious effects, right? There are mechanisms that the body has to sort of try to counteract any single mutation. But in this case, because of where it is, it was one of those mutations that actually impacts the structure of hemoglobin and red blood cells, and had these very huge impacts on how the body works. And so I was just completely amazed at that, about the science of sickle cell anemia. And then layered on top of that, I was really just incredibly surprised and felt like I could really have an impact on the Black community because it affects so many people of color and people of African descent. So I said to myself, what better way to have a career than to find the cure to sickle cell, win the Nobel Prize, and
I love
help
your
Black people.
goals.
Yeah, and
Absolutely.
this is actually true. I was a high school student, like this is what I'm going to do. And so it was kind of like a light switch in that moment. That was like, this is what I'm going to do. And so,
Let me just interject and ask a question.
sure.
So did you happen to know anyone personally who's been affected by sickle cell?
I didn't, I didn't
Wow.
know,
Yeah,
I
that
didn't
really
know
speaks to your
anyone.
passion for it. Because a lot of times you'll hear people say, I want to, study a particular topic because they have had, a relative or someone affected by it.
Yeah,
But I think that speaks so much to the passion, your just genuine passion for it.
yeah, for just understanding the disease and just my love for Black people and Black excellence in our health, and just seeing great things come, out of our community. We all are already great. And I think, sort of being able to serve my community in that way was the double whammy for me, because I could serve my community, which was very important to me, but I could also do research, which was also
Mm.
amazing. So yeah, that was sort of how how I got bit by that bug. And then had a fantastic mentor that sort of identified some summer programs that I could go to and conduct research. And one summer I went to a summer program at New Jersey Institute of Technology. And then another summer I went to a research program at Bennett College and North Carolina A&T in Greensboro, North Carolina. And both of those schools are HBCUs, and had the great fortune of working at Bennett College for a man named Francis Buckmeyer. I still remember his name because he's a pivotal person in my life, even though he is not aware of it. And I did research in his lab, and it had nothing to do with sickle cell. It was my first time in a research lab, and I was just sort of trying to figure out, what do I do? But honestly, I fit completely, seamlessly into working in a lab. I have some, I can work with my left hand, my right hand, and just sort of doing the bench work was something that came very naturally to me. And then just analyzing data and thinking about the scientific process, it was just all I just had a gift for it. And so when I was in the lab that summer, Dr. Buckmeyer said, Lola, if you want to do research, you're pretty good at it. If you want to do research, you should really think about getting a PhD. And I had no idea what that really meant. I had heard about a PhD before, but I didn't know what it meant to have one or what it allowed you to do. And so he said, you get a PhD, you can do research. And I said, oh, well, that's perfect. You know what I mean? This is exactly what I want to do then. So by the end of that summer, I had extended my kind of goal and my dream to finding the cure to sickle cell, getting a PhD, getting the PhD first, finding the cure to sickle cell, and getting a Nobel Prize. And that's how I kind of walked into the first day of, my experience at Brown when I graduated from high school. So what I will say is when I started at Brown, what I realized was it was a big leap. It was a big leap going from, a public school to an Ivy League school, where a lot of the students had been in like Ivy League prep
Right.
private schools. And honestly, I hadn't even heard of that before. I didn't even know such a thing existed. And so, they were definitely operating at a level that I wasn't accustomed to and didn't really know how to navigate well. It was just something that was just very different for me. And so I worked really hard. That's the only thing I knew to do, was to work hard. And that's
Mm.
what I did. I worked incredibly hard. Um, of all the degrees that I have, I feel like that degree, that bachelor's degree, is the one I'm probably most proud of, because it was the biggest leap. It was the biggest jump from high school to the bachelor's degree. You know, and I'll say pretty transparently, I kind of struggled my first couple of years at Brown. It was hard, you know. I knew I wanted to do it. I knew I wanted to be a biology major, and I graduated with a concentration in biology. But it was really, I was like a little bit of a fish out of water. And it wasn't, but I knew I had the passion, and I knew I could do it because I had just done research that summer before. So I knew I could do it. And that was what probably drove me and motivated me. But I've never been a person that's like incredibly, you know, gifted in the classroom. My talent and my gift is in the lab, and you know, was at the lab, in the lab at that time. And so the first couple of years at Brown, they really wouldn't allow me to work in the lab, which was a whole nother story. But it wasn't until my junior year that I got into a lab. And once I got into a lab and started like just getting my confidence back, I really just turned it around and was able to really flourish. And so that was sort of a synopsis of my Brown experience.
Before you move on, a couple of questions. So I know you said, you know, it was kind of a big leap going from Teaneck Public School System into an Ivy. And can you tell us about your parents? You know, how did you even end up at Brown? So few of us make it into these Ivy schools, particularly if you're coming out of a public school system.
Yeah, so I am very fortunate to have come from a very beautiful, wonderful, supportive household. My parents were huge advocates of education. And my mom, well, my dad, you know, was a electrician, a unionized electrician working in New York City. You know, he built, you know, or did the electrical work for some of the, you know, most famous buildings in New York. And my mom was a stay-at-home mom, you know, and she raised me and my brother. And like I said, they just were huge advocates for education. So if they were going to spend on anything, it was going to be on education, and for both me and my brother. And, you know, the effort and the energy that they poured into us to ensure that we had, you know, everything we needed, you know, in terms of, you know, just a good education they provided for us, you know. In terms
So
of,
you're first generation college student, right?
so somewhat, my parents didn't get bachelor's degrees, but I have an uncle that did go on to get an MD. But my parents, you know, don't have bachelor's degrees. But I had, you know, models around me. But and you know, some of my uncles and aunts have degrees, advanced degrees. But yeah, they were amazing. My parents were amazing role models, you know, and examples of, you know, just that dogged, like, you know, you're not going to deny me or my family, you know. And so they just were always just staunch advocates, huge advocates for education. I remember, I'm going to come back to Brown, but I just have to tell this story because it's a good one. So I was in middle school, and I think the importance of Black teachers is huge, and there aren't many Black teachers, and maybe, you know, Black men teachers, but had one teacher that really saw talent in me and wanted to sort of put me in an accelerated program. I guess she saw that I looked bored, and it wasn't because I wasn't paying attention, it's because the content was sort of, you know, I was past that content. Right. And you know, there were some issues with changing my classes. And so the guidance counselor at the time, you know, was a little reluctant to do it. And my parents just were unwavering in their, you know, sort of saying, if this teacher feels like she should be in these advanced classes, we're going to put her there. So they went all the way up to, you know, the superintendent, and we're like, we're going to move Lola into these classes. And so they were successful in doing that. And that's actually how I got connected with a woman, Joyce Baines, who was one of the, on the team of the superintendent. And she was the one that told me about those summer programs that I mentioned to you a moment ago. So But, did well. So my parents are just really strong in education.
That's a really great story that you share. And I think a lot of times as parents, particularly when our kids reach middle school and high school age, there becomes this question as to how much should you be advocating for your child, because you want them to be able to advocate for themselves. And at that age, I have a 14-year-old who wants to be so independent and is always like, "No, mommy, I got it, mommy. I'll talk to the teacher."
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
sometimes we do need to intervene, and it is above their heads. And I
Absolutely.
think it's, just finding that balance of, not being a helicopter parent,
Mm.
but still providing a level of support to your child and advocacy for them, to ensure that they're getting the services that they're entitled to.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. I think it's really important for parents to advocate, for their kids, because I think teachers are well-intentioned, principals, all the guidance counselor staff is well-intentioned, but I think also at the same time, no one's going to advocate more than a child and their parent, and so in my case, I knew I could do it. I didn't have a question, I could do it. And even I remember, this is a long time ago, but I remember moving into those accelerated classes and I had to sort of catch up a little bit. And I was like, man, this is really hard. But I knew I could do it, and I think there are those moments where it gets a little bit tough, but I think challenging yourself and seeing, if you're able to do these things is really important. And, my parents had a lot of confidence in me as well. And I think it's about finding people that will advocate for you. And that's a lifelong career thing that I've learned. People that will advocate for you is so important. And
How did
parents will
you
advocate for
build
their children.
confidence? How did that emerge in you? Because so many kids these days are struggling to build confidence. I hear kids say all the time, like, "No,
Yeah.
I can't do that." We just went through high school applications.
Mhm.
And for me, as a parent, one of the things that has always been important is that my son had choices. I
Yeah.
never wanted him to feel stuck, like he just had the one option and he had to go there. And so I was pushing, like, apply for whatever school you want to. I don't care what it costs. We're going to figure out a way to pay for it. And we're not rich people by any stretch of the imagination. But
Right.
I never wanted him to feel limited because of finances.
Sure.
And so he
Yeah.
applied to 4 schools. He got accepted to all 4 schools. And
Oh,
then it became, where do I go? And to me, that
right.
was like such a proud moment, knowing that he had choices.
Yeah.
And, um, he ultimately made his decision. But I think even getting through the application process, because he has had some difficulties
Mhm.
in some of the academic settings that he's been in, because he's been in the private independent school system. He's been in the public school system. He's currently in a charter school.
Mhm.
And because of those 3 very different settings,
Mhm.
he has experienced some microaggressions. His confidence definitely was affected. And having him apply was kind of like, well, I don't know. I don't want to waste my time and write this, this essay if I'm not going to get in. I'm like, what would make you think you're not going to get in? You're brilliant.
Yeah.
Right. And I think when
Yeah.
mom says it, it's like, yeah, you're supposed to think I'm
Right.
brilliant.
Yeah,
But
exactly. Exactly.
he is brilliant.
Of course he
But
is.
how
Of
do
course.
you build that confidence? Because you had the confidence from the get. You said you knew you would do well in these classes. So how did
Yeah.
you grow that confidence? Was that your parents doing? And then when you went to Brown, you kind of, I feel like you pulled back a little bit because you were in this new arena.
Mhm.
And you
Mhm.
said it wasn't until about junior year when you went into the lab that you felt back in your element and that
Yeah.
confidence began to grow again. So what do you think is like, how do
Yeah.
we build confidence in people in general, but especially in young people?
Yeah. So amazing points. And I agree completely. But let me also say I have moments of doubt just like everyone else. Major moments of doubt, I just try not to uh, I try not to live in those moments. I try to come out of those moments, but the few things around confidence, a few things. One, and this was, um, Teaneck in like the 80s, not the 80s, but the more the 90s, early 2000s, there was a community of Black families and people of all, Jewish families, Muslim families, there was a community of people that were unrelenting about their children's education. Mm-hmm. And maybe I'll just focus on the Black families that I knew at the time and my parents knew at the time. That little community and those friends that I made, we all wanted to be great. You know what I mean? Like we all wanted to do great things. We wanted to, become whatever our goals were. For me, it was to be a scientist. Others wanted to be, MDs, others wanted to be lawyers, whatever it was. We were all sort of like on the same page about what we wanted to do. And I think having that community is so important, and so, so for example, when, and we all kind of came up together, we went to middle school together and high school together. And so when it came time to apply for honors classes or not apply, but to enroll in those classes, we wanted to do it together, and so it's like, oh, you're going to be an AP bio, you're going to be an honors chemistry or whatever it was, we knew we would be together doing it. And so that helped because they were friends and you didn't feel so isolated and alone. So that was really, really important. And that'll come back later about how I got connected to Brown, but and even the summer program. So that's one thing. And I think, maybe the other thing is building on and identifying the things that I knew I was good at, like I said to you before, I know that I'm really good in the lab. I had to discover that. But once I knew I was good in the lab, I was always looking to get back in the lab because I knew that's where my happy place was. I knew that's where I was a rock star. So you have to find what your 10 area is. You're not going to find me. World history is really not my thing. Do you know what I mean? So I'm not going to necessarily, jump to a, world history class when I know that's not really my 10 area. So I think a lot of it is around finding what your gift is and your talent is and growing that, you know what I mean? Because that's where you'll find your confidence. And honestly, I had great teachers, not every single teacher was fantastic, but overall, I had some really good teachers, that really spent extra time. I remember, I had one AP calculus AB teacher that, really worked with us, really sort of spent a lot of time with us. And we were preparing for the AP exam. And she'd had like little tutorial sessions after school. And she'd say, if you want to come to my house on I think it was a Sunday because she didn't come, it was on a Sunday. So if you want to come to my house on a Sunday, I can tutor you for free. And I was like, I'm there. What time? Do you know what I mean? Like I just had that hunger. I wasn't going to ever turn down an opportunity. So I remember going to her house and no one else went. And she was like, you're the only person that came. You know what I mean? And we sat there and this woman was an absolute genius. First of all, she knew how to do AP calculus, but not only that, she can teach AP calculus. It was a totally different thing.
Difference between knowing how to do it and being able to teach it.
Totally different thing. And she could do both. And I just attached myself to her. You know what I mean? Like I just soaked it up like a sponge. So maybe that's the third thing I'll say is finding people that want to support you, will advocate for you, want to see you be great, and, locking in on what they're asking you to do and allowing them to support you. So,
definitely.
But
I'm hearing you say like surround yourself with like-minded people. Those are your friends. Yeah. And it's interesting because I think you're absolutely right in that you will surround yourself with people. And if they are positive people and doing positive things, you have a tendency to go right along and, make sure you're doing your work. You're almost in competition with each other who's going to get the best GPA. And if you're surrounding yourselves with people who are not necessarily doing anything, I think people have a tendency to kind of fall into that trap also. So I think it's, it's really important. They say if you're the smartest person in your group, you're in the wrong circle, right? So I think that's great that, that was one of the takeaways. And I think you're absolutely right. Having people who truly care about you and are invested in your success, your mentors, is so important to have.
It's huge.
How did you develop relationships with your mentors? Because it's interesting that you say that the teacher said, come to my house on a Sunday. You know, I think if we heard that statement today, we'd be like, what's that teacher going to do?
Yeah.
My baby's not going to the teacher. You can meet them at the library.
Right. Sure.
You know, it's a
Yeah.
different world now.
It is.
And so how do you develop and sustain those relationships?
So I just chuckle a little bit because yeah, I could definitely see how a teacher saying come to my house could be uncomfortable for a parent these days. And I would just say bring an adult. Do you know what I'm saying? That doesn't mean don't do it. You find a way to make it work. Do you know what I mean? Because I think, you know, sometimes, so there was a quote that I always live by. I live by this quote, and it's essentially, don't say I can't, ask how can I? Do you know what I mean? And that was just, you know, I didn't come up with that quote, but that's something I live by. Do you know what I mean? Because I think when you ask yourself, how can I, it opens up your mind to all the possibilities. When you say I can't, that's the end of the conversation. But mentors. So for me, mentors have been a part of my life for, I mean, forever, I guess my whole life, you know, starting with my parents. But outside of my family, I had mentioned to you, you know, the woman that worked at the Teaneck Board of Education. And she was probably my first mentor because she had a PhD. I didn't really know what you could do with it still at that point, especially because her PhD was in education. It wasn't in STEM. But, you know, I just always wanted to ask her questions. I've always wanted to just learn about what she did and how she did it. And I just always kept in touch with her. You know, I just always made a point of just sort of maybe just, and at that point I was like in middle school, high school. So what does that mean? That's like, you know, might be like writing her a letter, you know, writing her a card or something like that. Or, you know, maybe, you know, when she checked in on me or whatever, just talking to her for 15 minutes on the phone. But as I grew and sort of developed a little bit more, those relationships, or even, you know, I still have a dear, dear mentor this is from my middle school days, Dr. Antoinette Bush. She is still at Thomas Jefferson Middle School teaching. She was one of my science teachers. Black woman. She is a veterinarian. And I still talk to her. Do you know what I mean? Because she was a pivotal, not necessarily in like career path, but just seeing a Black woman that was teaching, that had some form of a doctorate, was just visually, you know, just sort of like representative of something that I could do. So, and I just feel like I just have a lot of gratitude to these people, you know what I mean? And so I want to keep them updated with what I'm doing and how things are going. And sometimes I have questions. I'm still trying to figure it out. I think we all are still trying to figure, you know, certain things out, you know? And so going to them as resources of knowledge and just like wisdom, I have not been shy, you know, and I think they've welcomed it. So, but honestly, I have had mentors my entire career, every single step. You know, the reason I got in a lab is because I got a mentor and he was like, I think you should be in this person's lab. You know, he took a liking to me and said, you have talent. You know, I really want to sort of support you. And he got me in that lab when I was at Brown. And that, again, truly, that changed the whole trajectory of my time at Brown. And that was because of him, you know. So I've had mentors I still have mentors. I'm still trying to get mentors. Like, to me, you know, the role of a mentor and the role of an advocate, which are a little bit different, can't be understated.
Right. I completely agree. When you talk about mentoring, I have had students come to me and say to me, you know, Dr. Banks, will you be my mentor? Right. And that's one form of having a mentor. But then there are these other people, like when I think of who my mentors are, I don't know that I've ever asked someone to mentor me. It just always became, I developed a relationship with someone.
Yeah.
And it was just natural and organic that
That's right.
I saw the person was invested in me. I saw that the knowledge that they had to offer, and they poured into me. Absolutely. And I'm so grateful for the mentors that I've had. But then we set up these mentoring programs, right? At one point, one of the roles I held was director of a mentoring program. And so we would assign students to mentors. And it always just seemed that those relationships were so much harder to cultivate,
Yeah.
because it was just like, okay, I'm placing you with this person.
Yeah.
And hopefully you all find things in common and you can develop this relationship.
Mm.
Whereas, when I think of, Dr. Josephine Moffitt, who I see as one of my great mentors, I never said, Dr. Moffitt, would you mentor me?
Right.
She just saw potential in me and was pouring into me. And when I saw that, I gravitated towards her, and would continue to go to her for advice and support. What type of mentoring would you say you experienced? Was it more formal mentoring where you were assigned a mentor, or organically developed?
I don't recall ever having an assigned mentor. Maybe because if I do, if there was one, it didn't last long. You know what I mean?
Right.
All of the mentors that I have, I'm really trying to think hard, have been organic. They really have been organic. And usually I have been the most, I'm just sort of running through my mind. Usually the ones that I have sort of really developed have been from me reaching out. I am an introvert, but when it comes to certain things, I'm not an introvert. And so when I see someone that I think I can learn from or I can get insight from, I'm very proactive about wanting to learn from them. And so let me just sort of maybe just run through some examples of how I met some of my mentors, because that's a big question people ask me sometimes, like, how do I get a mentor? So Gilda Barabino is one of my major mentors. She's now the president of Olin College in Massachusetts. But the reason I met her is because when I was at Georgia Tech, she was a visiting professor. She was at Northeastern at the time. She was visiting Georgia Tech for like a summer or maybe even a few more months. And she was doing research on sickle cell. Her research was on sickle cell. And I was like, she's a Black woman. She has a PhD in chemical engineering, which is STEM. And she does research on sickle cell. I don't see any greater opportunity than to, talk to her. And I just asked for 15 minutes, 30 minutes. I didn't ask for a long time. And I just sort of said, hey, here, here's who I am. Here's what I'm trying to do. I'd love to learn from you. And what's your path been? I've asked her those kinds of questions. And then you just kind of see if you click. I think that's the key. You have to click. And if you have that introductory conversation, you don't click, it's like, okay, thank you so much for your time, and you kind of just sort of keep it on the hopper, but you don't like necessarily actively, unless there's something else in particular. But Gilda and I, we immediately clicked, immediately. And like, it was like we were friends for a long time when we first met. And she has been in my life for like more than 20 years, probably. I have another mentor. I met him at a conference, and he was he was working at Brown at the time, and he was doing a lot of work in diversity and inclusion for graduate students. And I was a graduate student at the time at University of Maryland, Baltimore County. And I just came up to him and I said, hey, I would really love to learn about your journey. Maybe that's my opening line with people. I love to learn more about your journey. And if I resonate with your journey, or if I feel like they're being authentic and real, because that's what I look for in a mentor, authenticity, genuineness, then those are the kinds of relationships I try to foster. But I just look for common interests. Actually, the mentor from Brown that I had, he's passed away now, but he was a white man, and so you don't necessarily think at face value there's a connection there, but I'll be honest, he was just kind of quirky, and I'm a little bit quirky too. So it was like,
I think we all are in our own way.
you know what I mean? Like, let me just talk to him because he has like this kind of dry humor that, and we hit it off. And he was just a great mentor for me. And he introduced me to one of his proteges who was a PhD, she was running her own lab. And she and I just we're still in great contact today. So, and that's another way, maybe mentors of mentors, like if you have a mentor, they introduce you to someone that's farther ahead than you, but, still, someone that can be a mentor for you. So that's how I got my mentors. And I think it's just, you have to be intentional about maintaining those relationships.
Right. Right. And I know myself also being an introvert, that's challenging for us. Sometimes it's like, well, what am I going to call them and tell them? Like, I know I want to check in, but am I just going to say,
Yeah.
hey, how you doing?
So I have a trick for that, because that
Oh,
was my
give it to
thing
us. Give
too.
us.
I do. I have a couple tricks for that, because I have the same thing. I'm like, what am I going to say? I don't have anything to say. So giving all my tricks away. So here's what I'll do. I'll do a couple things. One, I'll just email them if I have a new update in my life. Hey, I got this new role, or I'm going up for this position, or whatever, just updates with me. That's one thing that I'll do. The other thing that I'll do is I'll get on Google Alerts, and I'll put in their name. And so say Gilda Barabino, so I'll put in Google Alerts, Gilda Barabino. And these are for like mentors that like, well, I'll explain in a minute. I put in, and so if anything in the news comes up about Gilda Barabino, I'll get an email.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've done that many times. I'll get emails about, my mentors, that they have received an award or they have gotten something, and I'll email them. I said, hey, I just found out you just got into this society. Congratulations. That's so exciting. You have time for a quick touch base. Do you know what I mean?
That's great.
I
That's a
just,
great tip. It really is.
yeah, I have found that has been a really effective way for me. And I just keep up with them. That's how I know kind of what's happening in their world. I've seen people use LinkedIn as a way to do it, sort of see what they're up to on LinkedIn, either just communicating if they post, responding to their posts. I've seen people like every year, people will say, hey, just wanted to touch base. Here's what I'm up to. Here's my resume. Do you know what I mean? And they'll just attach their resume or something like that. So the Google Alerts is like my little trick.
I like that. Can I take
That's a
your
good
little
one.
trick?
Yeah. Because it's not always easy, especially when you're kind of an introvert, or, it's just kind of hard to kind of come up with conversations out of the blue. Those are the things I usually try to do.
That's great.
Or if I see something, that's another thing. If I see I'm in higher education. So if I see something in the Chronicle of higher education that, might apply to them, even in a most remote way, I'll send, hey, did you see this article? I thought this might be of interest to you. It hits right on these things that we always talk about. So that's another thing.
I used to do this thing where at least once a week I would reach out to someone.
Yeah.
Because I'm not a big phone person. I'm the person who, if you need me, I'm there.
Yep.
But to say that I'm going to call on a regular basis really doesn't happen.
That's the same.
So I try at least once a week to call someone that I haven't spoke to in a while. Yeah. And this is, not even professionally, just in general. Sometimes it's a family member, sometimes it's an old friend, just to check in, and I think for me, it's practice on building those communication skills and, finding things to talk about and staying connected to people. Because I think the worst thing is when somebody reaches out to you only when they need something.
Exactly.
And it's kind of like,
not a good move.
Right.
And the thing is, and this is what sometimes helps me, it doesn't have to be an hour-long conversation. It can be literally 15 minutes. 15 minutes. And that is just that touch base is really nice to have. So yeah.
So you moved out of Jersey, obviously. You were in North Carolina.
Well, but you're back. When I was in high school.
So how were those transitions for you, going from Jersey to Brown to even transitioning jobs, that is an adjustment. You have to learn the culture of that new environment.
Oh, it's been interesting. So every place that I've been is very different, very, very different. As you mentioned, I went from Jersey to Rhode Island. But really I was literally on campus 90% of the time. And that transition was not obviously, but it was difficult. I was not around a very diverse group of people anymore, like I was when I was in Teaneck. It was just a different world, literally. As the TV show says, right? But I think what I did in that scenario, again, there wasn't a lot of people that I connected to, but there were some. And I just made that my group. That was my crew. That was my people, those are my folks. So I just, I just make those connections where I can, I hold on tight to them, Um, I think undergrad was one of those times where it was like, I greatly appreciate the Brown experience and the Brown degree. It has served me extremely well. But I can't say I was like out there partying, getting it in, you know what I mean? Like that wasn't what the experience I had. It was really like, let me get this degree, you know what I mean? And keep it moving. So I didn't hate it, but it just was like, it was like work, you know what I mean? Um, from Brown, I moved to Georgia Tech, so I moved to Atlanta. So the Atlanta experience was interesting because Atlanta was like, and it's probably still is, like Black Mecca. It was amazing,
Yeah, especially
AUC
at
is
that
out
time,
there.
right?
Oh my gosh, yeah. I I loved Atlanta. I loved Atlanta. I didn't really think at one point I didn't think I was gonna leave. I was like, I'm just gonna be here. This is my place, because it was just like so many, people of color, and then they were like doing really big things. Do you know what I mean? Like in all areas, whether it be education or government or nonprofit or for profit, there were just African Americans at all levels. You know what I mean? Just it was amazing. And then there was a really strong, religious community there. Um, it just checked all my boxes, Atlanta, so Atlanta was amazing. I did not, unfortunately, get the support that I was hoping that I would get at Georgia Tech, where I was a student there. And so that was a disappointment, that was a little bit tough.
What type
Um,
of support were you looking for that you feel like you didn't receive?
Um, I think I was looking for guidance on, a couple of things. One, guidance on how to be successful as a graduate student there. And two, there was some, in my opinion, some proactive efforts to, I want to just be thoughtful with my words, just to not have me succeed there. I think there were efforts to try to, for me to not be there anymore.
And
I
do you
think,
think that was a result of you being a woman of color, being a woman in STEM? What
yeah, I think that, you can never say for sure, but what I can tell you
you can
is
tell me how
that,
you felt, right? That's all we
yeah,
can, yeah.
that's all we can go based off of. I definitely felt like it was because of who I am, and that's a woman of color. Um, there were other women, there were white women, there were, other groups that were well received and supported and got what they needed in the same lab. And I and another woman of color, an Indian woman, were not supported and not given the respect or the tools that are needed to be successful. Just as an example, just the project that I received, that I was assigned to, was a complete disaster. It was a project that could not work. There was no way the project could work. And after multiple attempts to say this and to show this, probably lost about maybe 2 to 3 years just spinning my
Wow.
wheels on a project that I knew wasn't working. And I told the person that several times. And,
What was the project?
it was a sickle cell project. So that was the reason I had chosen that particular person to work with, because I was on the plan. Do you know what I mean? Like I was like, I'm gonna
On
get the
track.
PhD, I'm gonna find the cure to sickle cell. And I was on the plan. Like it wasn't just like a dream. It was like, this is what I'm gonna do. And got into this lab. The person was doing work on sickle cell. And it's a little bit of a technical project, but because you asked, so they're blood vessels, right? And those blood vessels are lined with what are called endothelial cells. And these are cells that are just like, kind of like, they just are on the inner layer. Like if you think about a pipe, the inner part of that pipe, these cells are on the inside of it. So when blood flows through the vessel, it comes in direct contact with those cells because the blood flows through, and then the cells come in direct contact with those cells. And so those cells are supposed to, they're supposed to change how they function when blood flows past them. And, we were looking at how red blood cells impacted those endothelial cells. And the project was from a master's student that had left. Honestly, I think the master's student just made up data and passed it along. And I got that project. And the data was just, it wasn't repeatable. And in science, data, the experiments have to be replicable. And the work could not be replicated. And that was the core issue. The data could not be replicated. And instead of believing what I was saying, this person, my person that I was working for, felt like I was the problem and felt like it was because I wasn't a good scientist and I wasn't doing the work correctly. And we just went back and forth with that for a long time. And so it just wasn't a good experience for me.
So when you run into a situation like that, how do you bounce back from that, knowing in your hearts of hearts that somebody who's supposed to be supporting you, you feel like they're not, right?
Yeah.
And you feel like they're not specifically because you're a woman of color, right? Because you see other students, other women, receiving that support that you are longing for. So I can imagine that scars you in some way.
It does.
How do you rebound from that? How do you rebound from that?
Yeah. So it was a process and it was a journey. It wasn't like, oh, I'm just gonna pop out and just, move on and forget about it. It was hard for me to come back from that. So by that time, I had finished the master's degree and was completely like exhausted, defeated. Do you know what I mean? Like just felt like I had been chewed up and spit out, that kind of thing. And was just dazed. That's probably the better way to say it. And so, had to just like lick my wounds for a little bit. But there is one thing that changed everything. I've had these pivotal moments throughout my career, but I think the key is to keep waking up every day and showing up. I think if I hadn't done that, my story would be a lot different. But I definitely don't have, I didn't walk up a crystal stair, but what I did and what changed my situation in that case was, I mentioned to you earlier when I was talking about my story, I worked at Emory and then I moved over to Spelman. And when I started working at Spelman, I'll be honest, I was still in a haze. I was still like, I never want to go back to school again, in as a student, getting a degree, that kind of thing. I was just really still just felt very burned by it. And I was working for a woman, her name is Lily McNair. She, another amazing person in my life. She was my boss. And maybe the first week, and I had told her nothing about my experience at Georgia Tech. I wanted to turn the page, move on with life. And I was working for her in a lab, and we went out to lunch like the first week of my job. And so we're sitting at lunch eating, and she says, Lola, when you interviewed, you really showed us, you really impressed us. And I just want you to know that if you ever want to go and get a PhD, I support you. And I almost fell off my chair because I was like, what does she know? You know what I mean? Like, who does she talk to? Has she talked to people at Georgia Tech? You know what I mean? Like I was overthinking it. And she hadn't, she just, again, God bless her, she just saw something in me and wanted to share that, and what she was saying was, I see you have talent. And if at any point you want to move on and move beyond this, I'm here for it. Do you know what I mean? Because sometimes in jobs, they want you to stay forever, because you're helping them. But I think in that first week, she was like, look, I understand this may not be a forever job for you, and that was huge. And so I was frozen. I didn't even know what to say. And so I just moved past it. And then, over time, just being in the Spelman environment, being around other Black women that were doing research and not only doing research, but doing it at a high level, you know, I was able to just heal from a lot of this stuff and get my confidence back. And that's where I got my confidence back for real, you know, because you know, I just knew I could do it. I was like, forget everybody else. That's where I really started getting the armor. You know what I mean? Like, I'm like, I know I can do this and I will
And
blow
you
down
were working there.
every,
You weren't even a
I
student
was
there.
working there.
You know,
I
it's
was not a
interesting because I
student.
talk to people all the time. And one of the things that comes out a lot in some of the most successful women that I have met is the college that they went to being so instrumental
Yeah.
in them developing their confidence and, you know, just knowing that they can do it.
Mhm.
And I think the same thing happens in work environments when you
Yeah.
have the right leadership. I think it can happen in a variety of places, but I do think that colleges in particular are
Mhm.
magical places.
Oh, they're magical. They're
They are
magical.
magical because when you think about what you are doing and how you're affecting the trajectory of another person's future,
Mhm. Absolutely.
amazing. You
Absolutely.
know, just
Mhm. And
absolutely amazing. Like when I think about my 18 years that I spent in higher education and the hundreds of thousands of students that I
right.
have had the honor to work with,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
almost like
Oh, it's a service.
I've
It's
been
a
a
great
I've been a
privilege.
blessing to so many people have poured into me and have blessed me and enriched my life in so many ways. So to be able to serve in that capacity, to me, there is nothing better
Yeah.
except for doing what I'm doing now.
Totally.
Because I feel like what I'm doing now is even, and maybe again, I had to go through what I've gone through
Yeah.
to arrive at this moment.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
right now, I'm allowing people to share their journeys and their stories, both good and bad parts of it,
That's right.
and
Right.
inspiring other people and letting them know, like, listen, this is what I went through. Look where I am now, right?
Mhm.
We see this
Mhm.
beautiful product, like, wow, you work at Cornell?
Yeah.
Oh, that like you're a big deal. And
Yeah.
you are, but
Yeah.
people don't know the backstory.
You
So
know,
they see this finished product and it's like,
right.
oh, I want to be like that. Well, you can do it,
Yeah.
but you
Yeah.
need to be prepared for
Right.
X, Y, and Z also, because
That's
it's not
exactly right.
all sunflowers.
That's
and
right.
rainbows.
100%. 100% agree. And there's a couple thoughts around that. So I, like you just said, you know, people will read my bio or whatever, you learn about me or whatever, and they see the end product and not know the story behind it. And that's fine. I'm happy to tell that story because I think it's an important story to tell. And I also want to try to help people, you know, all people, but women in particular, and women of color in particular, not have or traverse some of the challenges that I experienced because I had role models, I had mentors, um, but there were still some challenges I experienced and I faced. Do you know what I mean? And so that's part of the reason you know, I coach women, or people, but just in higher education that are leaders and managers that want to excel and want to, you know, see beyond some of the, you know, some of the muck that can
Mhm.
happen. And, you know, that's why I do some of that coaching now. But the other thing that you said that's is so important for me to say is, yes, I have these degrees from these places, but and what I learned this a long time ago when I reflect on my own life story is the points that were pivotal for like pivot points in my life were because those moments that like I was like, can I do this? What do I want to do? Those things that helped motivate me and get me back on the road were because of HBCUs, and not only HBCUs for Black women. So
Mm.
Bennett, as I mentioned to you before, was the place that I went to even figure out I wanted to do a PhD. And then Spelman was the place I went to regroup, lick my wounds, and get back in the game. And that doesn't fall short on me. And I am incredibly, incredibly grateful to both of those schools for what they gave me. You know what I mean? I think that that's just something that I can't go without putting out as a part of my journey.
I think that's beautiful. I hate that we are like almost out of time because I
Oh,
feel like
wow.
there's so much more that you could share with us. But
No,
I want to respect the schedule.
sure.
You have been phenomenal to speak to.
Thank
I
you.
loved hearing your journey. We didn't even get to personal lives or anything like that, but I think, you know what we did get was so important. So many jewels of wisdom. So I definitely appreciate you for that. I'm going to ask you one final question. What advice would you give to a young woman coming up now?
I would just tell women to stay the course, stay focused. There's so many distractions that can happen in life, but the other thing I would say is know what your non-negotiables are. Because what I'm realizing in life right now is that life doesn't always go as we plan, even though we might, with our best energy, have our goal and our sort of plan, but be open to other opportunities, other ways to make impact, but just know what your non-negotiables are. Do you know what I mean? Because I think once you know that, it'll be easier to traverse and make some of the decisions that you need to make, because you know what your the things that you're not willing to move on are, and that'll make it easier for you to make decisions. So I think that's what I would say.
Great advice. Great advice. Thank you so much, Dr. Brown. I have really enjoyed this conversation. I know that my listeners are definitely going to walk away with lots of great advice. I even took down notes and wrote down some quotes. I think every time I interview someone, I walk away feeling like, wow, I just learned so much. So thank you for sharing. Thank you so, so much for taking the time to do this. To my listeners, I want to thank you for your loyalty and for listening today. May your hearts be filled with the brightest of sunflowers, even on the cloudiest of days. This is Dr. Edith Banks with the Sunflower Nation, wishing you love and positive vibes.